Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, What Really Pays, Smarter Sulfur and Potassium Strategies for Corn and Soybeans, presented by ICL Growing Solutions. I'm Robin Sittberg of Meister Media Worldwide, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. This webinar has been approved for a half CEU credit in nutrient management and sustainability from CCA. So at some point during this webinar, an attendance poll will be sent, and you must respond to this attendance poll to receive credit. If you respond, once the webinar is finished, you'll receive an email with the QR code for reporting your credit. You simply scan the QR code from within the CCA app and submit it. Please do not close your web browser before the webinar is ended completely, or you won't receive the email with the QR code. And as a reminder, this is also for viewers watching the archived webinar. We will have time for some questions at the end of the webinar. So if at any time during the presentation you would like to ask a question, just go ahead and type it into your question pane and click submit. You can do this at any time during the webinar, and we'll take care of questions at the end. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Zach Minahan is a farmer and technical sales manager for ICL Growing Solutions. He's dedicated to helping growers increase profitability and productivity sustainably. With a background in agriculture from Fort Hays State University and hands-on experience from his family farm in West Central Iowa, he tailors crop nutrition solutions to meet each operation's unique needs and goals. Our other speaker is Ryan Sanders, and he is also a farmer and technical sales manager for ICL Growing Solutions. He brings more than 20 years of experience from Bayer Crop Science, Monsanto, Syngenta, and his own family farm. He earned a bachelor's degree in agri-science from Michigan State University. So we have two excellent speakers today, and I'm going to turn it over to Ryan.
Hey, thanks again, and really appreciate the opportunity to share some things today. Zach and I've been talking about many different things and how to approach this, and we really are trying to take a kind of a farmer first approach to this, and how we're coming to this kind of presentation. So, you know, we've got a couple products that we're really proud of within ICL, and hopefully talk a lot about polysulfate and earn some more interest. So really, to really kind of kick it off, though, we kind of talk about what is ICL. Some folks are still new to learning about what is ICL and what are we bringing to the table. So ICL is really a global company. We've been in business for over 100 years, even though it might be not a name that rolls off the tongue here in the U.S., but we're a global company in various different divisions, and so primarily focus on mining and fertilizer products across the globe. We also operate within some food grade phosphates and some other food additives and that. But Zach and I's main focus is in the growing solutions division, in that small triangle there. And so what we really focus within that business is specialty fertilizers for fertigation markets, water-soluble fertilizers, many other biostimulants that we're also bringing to the table. And one of our main products in that division is our polysulfate that we're going to talk a lot about more today. So as we took a step back to figure out what's really facing us today and facing us here in 2026 and even beyond, a little bit what we're going to call a reality check of agronomics versus economics. And you know, us involved in agriculture, we talk a lot about the bottom line, and we talk about trying to maximize our investments. We all know that it's not getting cheaper to put out an acre of basically anything at this day and age, and managing those margins are a priority. So we talk about a lot of our investments being under scrutiny, or investments in fertilizer, investments in land, investments in land and infrastructure improvements as well. And obviously nutrient prices fluctuate. We want to talk too about ag retailer efficiency, whether it's farmer applied material or an ag retailer efficiency. Everybody needs to be more efficient with their time. Because time is the one thing that we can manage. every day, and we try to be more efficient with our time and what we can do. We're going to talk about a few things that polysulfate brings to the table, and value in that efficiency is big too. So really, it's cost, the availability, and the return on investment, and risk keep growers and even retailers tied to maybe some traditional practices that we've kind of been ingrained in for so many years. And so as we look at where we're at, not only today, but where we're going to look at where we can be 5 to 10 years from now, I think we really got to take a look in the mirror to say, what can we do today that's going to change some of that impact to where we can be 10 years from now.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Appreciate the introduction. Like I said, I'm Zach Minahan. I've been with ICL as a technical sales manager for a little over 3 years now. Prior to that, had about 12, 13 years in ag retail space. A couple years ago, I got the opportunity to farm some family ground, which has been, a great learning experience. It's definitely tough at times, especially this year. So I think Ryan and I's goal here today is to try to bring a real world, practical farmer, real life experience, whether it's from the farm view or the retailer side. We're going to try to synergize kind of some of our products and not only talk about agronomic benefits, but also efficiencies outside of that. There's just not enough hours in the day, weather, to get everything done sometimes. So we definitely feel the pain from our experiences of what growers go through or what retailers go through. And Ryan kind of kicked it off there. So kind of understand the status quo. In tight times, growers sometimes, normally, a lot of times will fall back to what do we know? Where are we comfort at? Several times I've had this, do we need sulfur? Do we even need fertilizer this year? Have we put enough on in the past, right? That's what we've always done. I don't stabilize nitrogen. I don't do this. We focus on what we know has worked for us. And it's sometimes when things get a little skinny, margins get a little tighter, we lose innovation. We lose trying new things, demoing sometimes new things. I think sometimes we put learning at the farm gate or out in our fields when things are tighter. So we're going to try to cover a lot of those situations today, but really product based and agronomy based. So again, this is a multi-million-dollar customer. What finally convinced us to try something new? Is it success that the neighbor had? Is it a trusted consultant? Is it the third person at the farm gate talking to you that day? Is it something you saw on social media or TikTok? The information at a grower's hand anymore through smartphones is pretty incredible. So what drives a decision to be made at the farm? So that kind of brings us to the product we're going to spend most of our time on today is polysulfate. Polysulfate is mined and produced exclusively by ICL. It comes from the UK and northern England, and it is a balanced 4-in-1 crop nutrition. It's a homogeneous granular. Delivers sulfur, potassium, calcium, and magnesium, and hence kind of the brand name on there. It all is in the sulfate form.
So what are we talking about with polysulfate? Thanks, Zach. Appreciate it. We kind of get excited about this. I know when you and I are together, we pretty much want to just put some polysulfate on everything. And it really does have a place in a lot of different scenarios and across a lot of different production systems within agriculture. So like Zach said, it does contain 4 of the essential plant macros in a single granular. With a few trace elements in there we can talk more about. But primarily we look at this as a sulfur source, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. It's all in sulfate form. And you look at this as it's a low salt material as well. And so we're able to kind of pull some of that chloride out of the equations. We really need to take a step back and look at how we're making these fertilizer blends. Especially, we're going to talk some more about some pretty salt sensitive stuff, and even seeing some stand increases about where we're incorporating polysulfate and taking some of that chloride out of the mix. And we see gradual release with polysulfate as well throughout the growing season. We talk about different timings of when we can apply this and how this mineral breaks down with moisture. And one of the key things that we don't really talk much about or talk enough about with polysulfate and some of its value here is we've done some revised studies and some revised analysis, and we do have the lowest carbon footprint on polysulfate available with any commercial fertilizer out in the industry today. And it's very important as we look at where we're going to be at, like I said, 5 to 10 years from now, and some of these things that go into those carbon intensity scores and part of that equation. So polysulfate can be a real key player and have some meaningful reductions in those carbon intensity scores, not only just in renewable fuels and corn and ethanol, but on a whole farm basis within your fruits and vegetables as well. So one of the big things that we also look at too with this multi-nutrient material is kind of the synergistic effect between all four of these. And so you've got potassium in sulfate form, you got potassium sulfate, magnesium sulfate, and calcium sulfate. And as this mineral was formed over 200 million years ago, we're down mining this material that is a deposit from an old ancient lake bed that's over a mile deep under the North Sea. And so we're mining this material from levels to where there's not a lot of organic material in here. And right, so we're looking at a mineral that is all one homogeneous material. And it's all sulfate form. And we use the sulfur as kind of our base where Zach and I operate here in the corn and soybean world, and a few other things with vegetables and some of those row crops as well. But sulfur being a key nutrient that we're not getting enough of anymore. We used to rely on getting a lot of sulfur from the air, and now we're in a situation where we're becoming sulfur deficient in a lot of acres. And not only because we're not getting it from the air, but because our yields and our demand on those acres is increasing. And so we do have a great option here to bring some sulfur back into that equation and back into the fertilizer balance. And so with where we're also at with that nutrient release kind of being simultaneous, it also supports soil health and soil resilience being low chloride. So we talk a lot about the microbial activity and the biology behind what's driving a lot of these high management and high yield programs. This plays into that very well, being seed and also biological safe as well. Zach, I know you like to talk about solubility on a lot of these materials, and you've worked with a lot of these. So where does polysulfate fit into this to where we can look at how we compare these?
Yeah, when I first joined here, I kind of had, it was a wow factor for me, on how is this compared to, or how is it different? And really polysulfate, I kind of like to describe it. It can only be compared to, it can't really be matched because it's a multitude of other products on the market, so to speak, right? So we get compared to just regular standard potash or sulfate of potash, or AMS being a sulfur source, or elemental. These are probably up on the screen here, probably the big four that poly gets compared to. But we kind of cover all these bases, right? Because it is a four nutrient load in one. So, you can see lower salt index, and we'll show some slides here in a minute. But so, it's very safe on the seed, strip till, air seeders directly placed, very, very healthy nutrition that you can put directly in the band. Low chloride content compared to, just your standard 0060. And like I said, we'll show more, but the leaching risk very low, season long release. It's not too quick, it's not too slow. That's where we really see our benefits of a season long spoon feeding safe nutrient that poly brings into the table. So I think this slide, I always, when I present to people or talk to growers or anybody, I just kind of like to show this solubility slide. So as you can see, AMS, if you see on the right side, water needed to dissolve 1 pound of material. So 0.16, standard KCI MOP potash is 3, polysulphate is 6. So it's slower than AMS potash, longer solubility. And then if we go kind of more to a gypsum or a calcium carbonate, a pelletized lime or an ag lime type material, quite a bit quicker. So not too hot, not too cold, kind of the just right porridge approach. And that's really the solubility testing we've done is really what shows that gradual season-long release of it really matches the crop uptake curve with those nutrients. Elemental, we put elemental on here. Elemental has to oxidize. So there's a lot of other factors, temperature, moisture, air. Your elemental, it's kind of a tough to really, when does it become plant available? So it's a tricky one, but we get compared to it a lot because it's a, standard sulfur practice in today's, row crop industry. So again, here we're kind of, telling the same story here. I think these are some practical examples we've shown. So if you see the yellow chart, that is the nutrient release curve of poly. 1 is AMS and 4 is gypsum. So that just right. And number 3 is the uptake need of a soybean crop. So we just really follow that need of a crop's nutrient needs throughout the growing season. At the bottom, you can see we did some comparisons. So 750 pounds versus 2,000 pounds. If you see the release after 40-day increments and 80-day increments, how much more calcium we're releasing, and we're putting 1,250 pounds less on. So like I said before, we're going to talk about efficiency. How many more acres can you get with weather coming in, right? Or, how many less truckloads, or if you're a retailer fighting labor in the tender truck, what is that value of, again, nutrient efficiency, but can we relate it back to efficiency at the ag service center for these growers?
No, those are all key points, Zach, and I really liked how we look at that release curve being kind of mirrored right up against with crop demand. You look at that crop demand of a theoretical soybean plant here. We're releasing those nutrients right alongside that, just ahead of when that crop demand really ramps up later in the season as you get into that reproductive stage, and that can be also extrapolated with many other crops, that nutrient demand later in the season. So what does that really mean for us, as far as this balanced nutrition and not just more nutrients, right? So we've been using fertilizers for a lot of years in a lot of different cases, primarily focused on phosphorus and primarily focused on potassium, and we look at blends of those materials. And as we move forward and as some technology things improve, we're looking at multi-nutrient materials that we're putting out in the environment that help these plants grow. And so we're doing that with polysulphate with 4 nutrients in one pass. And you look at that as a sulfate form that's also available for plant uptake. Other forms of sulfur that are out there today have to go through some conversion processes microbially, whether, in your environmental cases, if you get some saturated soils or even cases where it's even too dry, a lot of that stuff is going to be slowed down, and we can't rely on those biological processes to get us through. As we look at that release curve throughout the growing season, getting us closer into that reproductive stage that aligns with that crop demand. And that nutrient use efficiency with that low salt and low chloride, with that highly available potassium, give it that kick at the end of the season as well. And so we've talked a fair amount about salt, and really it can't be ignored. We put a lot of salt out in our potassium sulfate, or in our potassium chloride mixes and various other things. And we talk a lot about it in that starter band, whether it's liquid or dry, going through the planter, especially on corn. And so you do have a risk of the seed and seedling injury. We look at opportunities with polysulfate. If you do have a dry option on a planter, it's a great in a seed starter. You look at opportunities with polysulfate and strip till. That's great for that. And in that concentrated band, we can reduce some of that salt load that is talked about a lot in that strip till kind of production system. So it helps with stand counts. We do look at some things where we might be able to reduce seeding rates. I'm no longer a seed guy, so I'm not going to be the guy to tell you to reduce your seeding rates, but some things can be looked at there. And so that's obviously another return on investment that we look at with that. And so as you look at combining all of these things, a couple different things come to mind. As you look at how do we really put this together, we've done obviously a lot of testing with this material, and we look at it across various different crops. One reason Zach and I share a fair amount of canola importance with canola here is they are pretty sensitive to salt, and so we were able to kind of extrapolate some of that out into our regular row crops. But you look at what we've done here in studying polysulfate with canola, regular ammonium sulfate and potassium chloride applications are actually reducing stand, whereas polysulfate at even a pretty low rate, just your 100-pound rate, is increasing that stand in a standalone option. And so we've also seen this in soybeans as well, and some other studies to where we're in the middle of some multi-year studies with soybeans as well, and looking at some of those stand reduction with just a potash application in front of soybeans, and being able to replace some of that potash with a material like polysulfate is really important as we move ahead with not only inputs getting more expensive, but we look at the technology that's in a lot of this seed, and we look at a lot of these new seed treatments and a lot of these biological materials that are coming, not only already coming on the seed, but even planter box treatments and various other biological stuff. We want to be as safe and as efficient for that kind of material as we can be. And so this is a key part to helping a lot of that biological system operate more efficiently. And so we have some key partners up in Canada that have done a lot of work for us and with us on polysulfate. And we're able to take some pretty impressive photos that we share across the Corn Belt and across the country. But you look at some of these things magnified pretty intently, and on the top left here, you see wheat, fine hairs root there with wheat, and that's a polysulfate granular that wheat root hair is basically attached right to. And so other fertilizer materials, you're never going to see that, and primarily that's because of that salt. And so these roots attach directly to that granule because it's plant food material that's readily available for it. It's exactly what it's looking for as those roots expand out into the soil. And so we're pretty proud of the fact that we can offer material that is safe. It's basically pure plant food that we're putting out there. Same thing on corn. You see in the top right, this corn root is basically has fine root hairs attached right to that polysulfate granule, just at emergence. And so there's not going to be a lot of dry fertilizer that's going to be that close to the seed. But in this case, if we get material that close, we're not concerned at all. And we've got a lot of great plant food sitting right close to that seed. And same thing echoed with canola. The barley, you see just a mass of those fine root hairs attaching right to that granule polysulfate. And so that leads us down a path of, for Zach and I especially, it helps us to say, you know what, we really are doing the right thing out here. We've got a great material, and we're really proud of the fact that we can bring this to the market. And we're excited for more opportunities as we expand our distribution across the U.S. and obviously Canada as well. So a couple things that we also share too is we talked about the seedling impacts, but what does that mean in yield? And so looking at yield wise, we're able to see obviously a yield bump, and that's helped grow some business across those environments. And so that can be a little bit of a misnomer that, hey, we're reducing stand, and so as you talk about reducing stand, your production per plant is obviously going to have to increase, and so it's not something we can compensate for once we lose that stand. And so as you look at what we see with yield improvements with polysulfate, there's some great opportunities that can be had. And we're not only just doing it in canola, we picked one study out here too, but we see data as we're going to talk about a lot more here as we move on with corn, soybeans, and various other things. And so we're pretty proud of it across various different environments. So Zach, I know this gets a little bit more back in our wheelhouse here with corn. But especially you look at urea applications with polysulfate. What do you see we're looking at here?
Well, I want to be the folks on the right side, I guess, just based on the photo, right? This is the things we like to see when we do side by sides, right? You want to hands down visual approach, but you also need yield. You also need economics with it. We're going to kind of talk about, poly and the synergies it has with some other things. When we look at cropping systems, when we look at soil, it's a system. Everything kind of falls into a balance point, right? Base saturation soil. It has to be it's always a balancing act. You get out of balance, everything kind of falls out of place. And that's what, poly really brings to the table. So it's really fine print, but at the bottom, if you can see, the farmer practice on the left, they put 500 pounds down of urea. And then with polysulfate, we actually cut the nitrogen rate down to 400 and added 100 pounds of polysulfate. So about 45 to 50 pounds less of overall N nutrient. But with that addition of sulfur, with that addition of the other essential nutrients, probably a little bit less burn from the urea being kind of harsh. If you've ever top dressed corn, it flashes around June, July time in these upper Midwest row crop acres. So I hope we get we mentioned efficiency a few times on this, but the efficiency of poly, but how it plays into the whole system is really kind of an eye-opening thing that I've really drawn to, and I think Ryan has, and that's where we've had a lot of our success. Our growers have had success by implementing, poly into their nutrient practices. So again, talk about nitrogen use efficiency. There's no nitrogen in polysulfate, but we increase the nitrogen use efficiency. We know adding sulfur helps stabilize nitrogen, helps hold it in the soil longer, hold it to the soil colloid. In high nitrogen environments, this is versus elemental. You can see the AB, 120 pounds of N, elemental versus polysulfate, kind of a wash. We did win that trial just by a little bit, but when we get into the higher nitrogen situations where, again, the system has to be balanced as we go up, we greatly improved yield in the higher nitrogen situations. Again, no nitrogen, no phosphate and polysulfate. However, we consistently improve uptake of nitrogen and phosphate into the plant. This is some studies that were done in the UK by some agronomists on winter wheat. But again, the synergy and the ability to make everything else work better. These are really, eye-opening. I hate to be the one that says it, but the price of phosphate today, if we can increase your phosphate uptake by 20 to 40%, what is that worth to your growers or your acres? So these are really things we like to talk about, is what else do we improve other than outside of the nutrients that we're bringing to the table with polysulfate. Increase K efficiency, potassium efficiency. So these are some studies in Tennessee and North Carolina that our agronomy group did. Again, we blended MOP, potash together, and then we ran a little bit higher rate of polysulfate. Again, the nutrient efficiency, that slow, steady, kind of ideal release curve of all four of those nutrients as the crop needs it is where these yields really come from. And again, in the middle there, on the right, North Carolina, considerably less amount of potassium in our analysis versus an 0060 type of product. But again, the efficiency, the sulfate form, that consistent spoon feed approach of a safe, pure nutrient, crystal, granular. So alfalfa, polysulfate is I believe, an ideal material for alfalfa. You can see there our yield results after the late cuttings too. So we extended it. We kept tonnage high. Also, Ryan mentioned the kind of healthier and lower carbon. We increased crude protein. So we increased, feed value by taking some of those negative side effects that, more commodity type fertilizers bring into the situation. So we maintained yield and we produced a higher quality forage product. Those are really, again, eye-opening or wow factors when we do these studies. But alfalfa is definitely in forage pasture. I think Scott, he's a gentleman we used to work with. He'd always call it happy cows. Any forage that gets polysulfate, you'll have a happy cow after it.
Well, it's kind of hard to follow that happy cows, Zach. But I do think one thing that we see is you see better palatability with alfalfa, better palatability on pastures as well. So it's another great impact. And we talk a little bit more here on calcium, especially. And so we've kind of come full circle here. Now we're talking about peanuts, and peanuts being a very high calcium demand crop. So this is a crop we move a lot of polysulfate material on. And the real key here that we wanted to show is that, gypsum being part of that standard procedure in a peanuts cropping system, replacing some of that gypsum with even a low rate of polysulfate. I consider polysulfate at 100 pounds a pretty low rate. The advantage here of being able to blend that material into other fertilizers, making that all a one-pass system, adds to your efficiency as a producer, and being able to maybe take that extra application of gypsum out of that equation. And so we look at increased efficiency here on time, as well as increasing yields being a big part of how we're adding to people's bottom lines as we expand our exposure of polysulfate across the U.S.
And Ryan, on that slide 22, I just think of, again, not enough hours in the day. What's it worth at 1,000 pounds versus 100 pounds? That's roughly another 400 acres per truckload, per 25-ton truckload. Again, efficiency outside of just the nutrient feeding, but what is that worth to, again, rain coming in, spring windows get tight, application windows get tight. That can be huge for, a dry shed servicing a lot of acres in the fall or spring.
Sure. And kind of to that point too, we're looking at a corn trial here. So we're looking at blending polysulfate and into the blend, and we get a lot of questions. Okay, how do we use this, right? Do you put it out straight? Do you need to incorporate it? What's going down here? We've got various different blending options in different rates. So we look at a blend with polysulfate and your traditional potash. And we look at to where we can bring some of that potash down, taking that chloride out of the equation. We're adding test weight, so it's kind of a little bit of a measure of quality, of course. And so you look at a yield here of 2 bushel. Doesn't sound like a whole lot, but if you look at this at a higher rate with polysulfate, you're really doing more with less. You're putting more available phosphate out there, or available potassium out there, and you're bringing that calcium and various other nutrients to the party that potash doesn't bring. And that's where you're getting this increased quality and also that increased yield because of that nutrient balance that it brings. And as you look here, you've got some soils that are relatively high in potassium, fairly marginal on phosphates, good organic matter, basically what I would call a good corn growing environment. And we're able to bring a lot of consistency with that advanced in gradual release with polysulfate. And so as well, we talk a lot about magnesium and how this comes into part of our production system. And within some things that we've worked on in the South as well, obviously we got to work on cotton. And so we've got some information here. And part of our cotton yield and lint trials, you look at polysulfate being part of that equation, and not only just against potash, but there's other things here. Your sulfate of potash, magnesia being what would be your K-mag kind of materials. And so even just in a head-to-head, we look at material that we can bring a little bit more to the table. So we're bringing calcium into the mix that other things don't, and it's part of that. It's part of that equation too. So you look at with polysulfate bringing calcium, magnesium, and potassium all in there. It's helping drive yields in these high yield environments. So another thing too that we talk about with polysulfate is we know this material, we know the ore that we have, and we know some of its origins and how to use it. We're learning about our slower release materials, but as we also continue to try to innovate, we've got some things that we're working on as well to even bring more to the table. And so as you look at where we're at today and where we're going, Zach, let's talk a little bit more about PKpluS and what that brings and why that's important for us in the Corn Belt.
Yeah, so PKpluS was really developed from the field, from grower looking for efficiency. How much can we put into one granular or homogeneous sprinkle, and then also again at the dry shed of how there's only so much bin space. We've got 5 different sulfur products or multiple phosphate products. So this was really developed and innovated through the field and kind of requests we got back from the countryside. So PKpluS, it's built really on all the strengths that we just shared with you on polysulfate, now with added phosphorus. So it's a 5-in-1 nutrient. It does not carry the organic certification that polysulfate does. Polysulfate is organic certified, but we've added phosphate into the mix. So again, a homogeneous prill with 5 nutrients, slow season-long release. It's again developed on the shoulders of the benefits of polysulfate with additional nutrients now in the portfolio. Like I just shared, 5-in-1 nutrient delivery system. If you see the chart on the right, low salt index compared to MAP, DAP, AMS. So again, seed safe, strip till, root, just a really nice plant nutrition safely delivered. And even though it's a less phosphate per pound, it's a homogeneous brittle. So you're gonna feed that crop so well by having all those nutrients packed together and delivering at the same time. We showed the synergies of phosphate, improvement. That we're going to replicate that by even having phosphate in the mix now. I always like to say too, this is my own phrase, but when we're in a broadcast market or even in a strip till or however you apply your dry nutrients today, buckshot versus birdshot, right? So we're gonna cover that ground with those 5 key nutrients. So your root interception, if you're in 30-inch rows, if you're in 7.5-inch soybeans, drilled wheat, your root interception and interaction is going to increase 100-fold, 400-fold. Your surface coverage is going to be so much better versus a higher concentration. I would say elemental, if you're wanting 20 pounds of sulfur, you're going to put 30 to 40 physical pounds on. I just don't know how 36,000 plants per acre are going to interact with 35 to 40 pounds of physical material, right? So that's a little bit of my personal opinion, but I really like an even nice surface coverage, and that's what PKpluS can bring to the table with being a little bit lower analysis.
Yeah, one thing I also like about PKpluS is, you've got that nice material, a manufactured material that we look at. It's a great material going through air seeders or strip till into that mix. But you're not losing any of those properties that we've already talked about with polysulfate. So, it's basically, and that's one of the reasons we call it PKpluS, right? You've got all of that qualities that we talk about with polysulfate, but now plus the phosphorus. And phosphorus is getting a lot of attention these days because of efficiencies or even part of that inclusion in our cropping system. And so we've got a great opportunity here to bring something that's helping add some of that efficiency back into our production system. And like Zach said, this is brought to us because of demand in the market. We look at polysulfate, our granular polysulfate. It's kind of our base of where we're establishing to what we can bring additional materials to the marketplace. So PKpluS being that material we're discussing here with the added phosphorus. We also have another material called our polysulfate premium grade. And so that again is for those air seeders, direct seeded kind of production and systems. A little bit faster release in that, just because you're dealing with a finer granule. But down the road, we're working on several other formulations of these kind of materials. And so, I guess for risk of sounding, kind of like a broadcaster, but stay tuned for more, because there really is a lot more coming, and we're going to be excited to share some new launch materials that we have in the works. And really, like Zach said, it's driven from customer demand, and as we see things and opportunities as we work out across the countryside, and we're happy to partner with a lot of our retailers and distributors across the U.S. that help us bring this material out to the growers that we service. And we talked a little bit earlier about, how does this fit into existing programs, and why do we need to change what we're doing? And we get this conversation a lot of, hey, I sounds like a great material, but where am I going to put it? I don't have a bin. I don't have it for this. So there's various different ways we can kind of approach that. We've got terminals across the U.S. we can operate from, and we're looking to expand distribution across the U.S. all the time. But as you look at the opportunity for this material to be in multiple different crops, multiple different application times, whether spring, fall, even winter, a material that does not have any phosphorus, like our standard or our regular granular grade polysulfate, fits in these areas where phosphates may be a little sensitive, where we're in some restricted areas on phosphate applications, or how that works for some water quality issues that we see. So a great option to spread some of that workload, because there's no phosphorus in this material going into these other blends. So I look at that being a great option as well. And custom blends is something that we look at all the time. I know, Zach, you've got a lot of history here with polysulfate on your own, and you've got some blends that you like to run too. You want to speak to some of that?
Yeah, I think it's a great title of how does this fit? I like the material, but again, bin space so what we've done a lot with a lot of my accounts, as well as my own farm, is we've kind of created a 50-50 ratio. That way we're still able to use variable rate, based on the overall K value of the soil recs or the cropping, need. But then we can set a baseline of we're going to still get, 20 pounds of sulfur out there, right? So polysulfate is a great company to, whether it's potash, whether it's phosphorus, just depends on your soils, your cropping systems. But we see it mostly ran in the blends. We showed you some data. It can be ran by itself, absolutely. But I would just say in a real world application, this is going to be paired with potash a lot, or MAP DAP. We get to Nebraska and some of the Dakotas where they're very high potassium. They just need a sprinkle and, even just a little bit of chloride out there sometimes for some small grains. So it kind of fits a lot of different angles, to make its way into those blends successfully.
So one thing that we would like to kind of close with here is, we've talked a lot about polysulfate. It's not just another fertilizer. We look at it as opportunity to bring a new material into your production system, because there's really nothing else like it on the marketplace, to where you can bring all of this material and, seed safe, biologically safe. Like Zach said, it is organic certified. It is OMRI certified. The polysulfate granular is OMRI certified in those type of scenarios. So we look at something that could be a game changer for a lot of people to bring into their production system, especially as you look at all these new biological materials that come to the market. There's a lot of interest in how we look at soil health and how we look at the biology that's happening under our feet, and we look at how to stimulate that growth to help increase production. And polysulfate's a big part of that, because you can look at a balanced nutrition. It's obviously what plants need. We see that with the pictures that we show of the roots. They grow right into these granules. So let's work with Mother Nature instead of trying to fight against her. And I feel like we've really got a great opportunity here to help build a good system as we move forward. So I'm excited to bring it to as many growers as we can across the U.S. And I know, Zach, your excitement, you bring your excitement to me as well. And so we talk about a lot of opportunities here. And so we're excited for polysulfate and what that brings.
Yeah, I urge, if any growers are listening, or any retailers, or I urge you to just try it. Right, we only get 30 to 40 crops in our lifetime, right? So me and Ryan are very confident. We've used this on our own farm. We've seen enough acres with it. It will work confidently. It will work for your system. There's not a lot of products out there where we kind of guess at, but this is something I just urge you to give it a shot and look at it. Because I think you'll kind of see and jump on the bandwagon that me and Ryan have been on for the last 3 years as we've grown this business. It's been very fun, very exciting, because the yield results are pushing the envelope for it. So I appreciate everybody's time. We do have, if there's any time for questions, please add in, or I don't know if you can shout them out or you can text them out, but if there are any questions, please.
Yes, please go ahead and ask any questions that you'd like to by submitting them in the questions pane on the lower left corner of your screen. And we have gotten some questions already, so I'm going to go ahead and fire them off to Zach and Ryan, and you guys can jump in, whichever one of you or both, if you want to answer it. So our first question is, what recommendations do you have for strip till applications of polysulfate?
Sure. Zach, you want to take that?
Yeah, you know, we showed some of the photos of being really safe. A pretty high rate. You know, the being in a concentrated band, I think it's, 5 to 7 inches and then 4 to 5 inches down. That's where we're concentrating. I'm not the person to say cut nutrition by any means, but 100, 200 pounds, you can get up to 250 and still be seed safe, root safe. I can't really give a clear cut answer without really diving into soil samples or what your yield goals are, but I think 150 to 175 pounds is a really nice balance, unless you're maybe in some sand or some other things. But corn and soybeans, a lot of the growers I work with are around that 135 to 180, somewhere in there. Try to be 25 to 30 pounds of sulfur is what we see a lot of.
Okay. Brian, did you want to add anything to that, or should I move on to the next question?
No, that sounds great.
Okay. Our next question is, there are some growers with dry fertilizer on the corn planter. What kind of blend would you recommend for that?
Sure, I'll take that. I run into that some. There's a lot of liquid planters out there, but there is an opportunity for dry, mostly going to be like in a 2x2 sort of scenario. And we see those blends actually being able to customize that dry blend is a pretty unique situation for a lot of folks that have that. But looking at something to where we can put that kind of nutrition right close to the seed, I've seen blends folks put together starting at about 50 to 60 pounds polysulfate inclusion. I've gotten up to 80 pounds in a 2x2 of inclusion with in a 2x2 with polysulfate in the granular. One thing that I would encourage to kind of take a look at is the opportunity to pull back some of that potash, just like we talked about, so you can take some of that salt out of the equation. A lot of those blends are going to involve MAP or DAP, other phosphates as well, and so there's going to also be an opportunity probably for some AMS or some urea, some other nitrogen. If you can increase the inclusion of polysulfate in there, you not only get the impact of our material, but it's going to improve the nutrient flow into the plant from all those other materials, just like we've seen in our wheat studies. And so I'm pushing 80 to 100 pounds in that 2x2 band, but 60 is a good place to start on 2x2 for dry starter fertilizer.
Okay. Zach, anything to add, or should I move on?
No, I think that covers it. Yeah, it's hard to really pinpoint, but I think we just say test it, right? Run a low rate, run a high rate, find what works for your ground.
Okay. All right. Our next question is, how hygroscopic is this material?
Sure. As far as a specific number, I'm sure we have that number, but we look at some of that release curves, and it is going to take moisture to do that. So what we look at here with that granular material, it's not going to absorb water. It's not going to draw moisture in storage, kind of, like a urea or some of these other kind of things, or a potash would. But once we get that into a soil and we get that to where we can start to function and break some of that down, it does absorb moisture and absorb water into that granule, and it basically kind of releases from the inside out. What you'll see with this material too is, in a broadcast scenario, if it's left on top, you're going to be able to go out and find some of this stuff, 6 weeks or so. We've been able to see some of that, and you grab those and you pick those up, and really they're just a they're just a shell of what they once were. They're just kind of a skeleton. The structure is still there, but it's basically melted from the inside out, and it's kind of an interesting thing to look at. But I don't know if I answered this question specifically on hygroscopic, but it's a nice material to handle. Doesn't draw moisture in storage, but once we get it in there, it's gonna absorb moisture into itself and release throughout the growing season.
It won't sweat. If we've ever been in a dry shed when it's hot in June, July, it doesn't sweat like urea. It stores nicely. And to Ryan's point, release it from the inside out. It's kind of, use the analogy, it's like a snake shedding its skin. It just kind of releases almost in layers a little bit, but it does leave an exoskeleton, a hollow exoskeleton. So it's a unique release of the granular.
All right. We've got a couple more questions here. We'll get in as many as we can. What is the cost comparison to, it says MOP. Do you mean MAP? I don't know. But MOP/AMS fertilizers?
Sure. So it's kind of a tricky one, cost comparison. MOP, that'd be muriate of potash.
Okay. Thank you.
That's regular potash that we've been talking about there. So obviously it's check local listings kind of thing. So some of this does vary across the country, but to generalize, polysulphate, as far as cost comparisons, we can bring, it's going to be comparable, I guess, without getting myself in trouble here talking too much on costs and all that. But obviously we're a little bit of a premium material here, and so it's not going to be bargain basement price discount across the countryside, but you're looking at material that's bringing a lot of nutrient to the party. So we are able to compete in those kind of blends. And so what I like to say is we're bringing more than just what's the numbers on the paper.
Okay.
But I encourage you to go to your retailer, ask for it. If they say they don't have it, they can get it because we do have nationwide distribution. And contact us for any direct questions, and we can get you set up with retailers. And we've got a blend calculator that we like to share that not only goes through what nutrients we add, but also kind of compare that as in a cost analysis as well. So love to work with whoever we can on that to kind of build those blends and create some good value for our growers.
I would urge you to break it down to the nutrients that you're getting with polysulphate. If you really value the 4 nutrient, the efficiencies, it's the cheapest polysulphate you're going to buy because it's polysulphate, right? I shouldn't say it like that, but that was one of the things I had factored in on my own farm, and I know Ryan has, is this is cost competitive for what we're getting out of this material. There's a lot of advantages that we can't make with, you have to basically use 5 different other materials to make this comparable blend. So if you break it down to a nutrient, seed safe, balanced soil, it is a really nice value for the grower.
All right. Well, with that, I think we're going to wrap it up because we've just got a minute left. I want to remind everyone that an on-demand version of this webinar will be available probably in the next hour or so at the same link that you used to log on today and to register. It's all the same link. You can also find the link at croplife.com/webinars. And you will also get an email reminder tomorrow, right around this time, that will have the link in there as well. For those seeking CEU credit, if you responded to the attendance notification for the CEU credit, please do not close your browser before the webinar is ended completely, or you will not receive the email with the QR code. And this is also for viewers watching the archived webinar. So just don't close it out until it's all done. And I want to thank our speakers, of course, Ryan and Zach, for an excellent presentation, and for you for joining us today on what's probably a cold day for most people in the country right now, not everybody. And thank you to ICL Growing Solutions for making this webinar possible. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.